Video, we'll be going over IRS Form 15103, Form 1040 Return Delinquency. So this is the tax form that you might receive if you've received a CP59 notice indicating that the Internal Revenue Service has not received your tax return yet. So we've written an article. You can follow that step by step. It also includes background information on exactly what your CP59 notice should tell you, some situations where you may consider filing your tax return even if you don't need to, and some additional insight. And we'll put links to our articles and other resources we've created about this tax issue in our show notes. So for this video, we're simply going to go through the form and walk through how you would complete it. Unlike most of my other form articles, this one we're starting with a blank slate. So we're just going to walk through this as if we're completing it for our hero, John Doe. So John Doe's social security number goes here. This top part is the contact information. So we're going to enter his address. And then we're going to list a phone number that the IRS can reach him if they have any questions. So generally speaking, the IRS tries to offer different ways to contact, specifically if you're trying to resolve a tax issue. So to the extent that you can complete your contact information, you should. Now, the instructions say if your address has changed, make these changes below. So, however, I would complete this field regardless for a couple of reasons. One, this tax form does not have any outside instructions that tell you any more detail. And two, if you haven't filed a tax return in quite some time, you may have moved. Now, if you've lived in the same residence for decades and you know that your IRS or your IRS record has the same address as you currently live, that's a different situation than if you may have moved 2 or 3 years ago. Maybe you filed a tax return after you moved. You're not really sure. So a different situation. So if you do have any doubt about whether or not the IRS has your correct address on file, I would go ahead and put your address. I would also consider filing your change of address form with the IRS. So you can do that by normally filing your income tax return. But if you're not required to file your tax return, then you may consider filing IRS Form 8822 for individual households, or IRS Form 8822-B for business owners. So this is a Form 1040 return. We're going to assume that you would be using IRS Form 8822 to update your address in the IRS records. You can also do this by calling the IRS. So if you were already planned to call the IRS because of your CP59 notice, then you can validate your information and change your address while you're on the phone. All right, so in this section right here, we're going to go over one of two circumstances that might have happened. So if John Doe had already filed his tax return, he would check this box. And let's just say that the CP59 notice was for the 2023 tax year. He would write that he filed his tax return for 2023. He would enter his name as it appears on his tax record. He would enter his Form 1040 for the 2023 tax year. If he knew what the tax return date was, he would enter the date that he filed it. So if you don't know, that's okay. The IRS requires you to send a copy of your filed tax return. You should have information on that tax return somewhere to be able to determine, what date you had filed it. So you would enter that. Now, if the person addressed on this notice is deceased, let's say that this is your grandfather and you're receiving his correspondence, you don't know what to do with it, you would enter the date of death here. So let's just say that in this case, John Doe passed away 2023. You can check whether or not you've already filed an estate or trust income tax return. That's IRS Form 1041. So you can click that and then you can enter, let's see, the John Doe Revocable Trust. And then you would enter the employer identification number that's assigned to that trust. So, and then you would enter the tax return year. So let's say that was for the 2023 tax year. So you can also indicate whether or not you don't think you have to file your tax return. So there are a couple of reasons. The most common reason for people not having to file a tax return is because their income doesn't meet the filing requirement. So you would enter, you don't think you have to file a tax return for the year. Unfortunately, you have to kind of do this a couple of times. So all of these should say the same tax year. Now, so you're going to enter your filing status, any special conditions that applied to you, your total income, and then the reason that you didn't file. If this is for more than one tax year, there's no instructions saying that you have to do this, but my reading of this form leads me to believe that you would probably need to do a separate form 15103 for each tax year, mainly because if you try to do this, for example, for the 2022 and 2023 tax year, and if you're not filing on basis of your income, it's very hard to be able to put 2 years worth of tax information in this form with the layout that they currently have. So I would probably, again, there's no instruction telling you that you have to keep one tax year of information on each tax form, but I think it's inferred here. So let's go through this. Let's say John Doe is single, he was 65 or older, and he was blind, and then his total income from all sources was $12,000, and then we would have to go to the IRS publication for that particular tax year. So it happens to be IRS publication 501. This is dependent standard deduction filing information. So here's a pro tip for you. You will need to pull up the publication 501 for that particular tax year. So as you can see, this publication's been updated every year pretty much since it was a publication. So if you're doing this for the 2021 tax year, you would have to go through the 2021 version of publication 501. So I'm going to open up the standard deduction part of this, because generally speaking, if your income is lower than your standard deduction or your taxable income, you would not need to file a tax return. So I'm trying to find the tax deduction amount. And the tax deduction amounts for most people are indicated here in this table. So if you're single or married filing separately for the 2023 tax year, your standard deduction would be $13,850, and John Doe's declared income was $12,000, so he should be okay. Now, this is where you might get in a little bit of trouble because if you have income from multiple sources, then the IRS receives copies of all of these sources. So if you have a W-2, if you have 1099s coming to you for even, part-time work. Like all of that stuff gets reported to the IRS. So if you had a W-2 that said you had $40,000 of total income, the IRS might come back and audit you. You might be able to justify all of it, but you definitely need to be very careful here, because you don't want to give the IRS any reason to come back and apply an audit. If you do get audited and the IRS finds out that you owe significant amounts of taxes and you went through all of this, then you can not only be subject to your failure to file and failure to pay tax penalties, you can be looking at accuracy related penalties, penalties for willful disregard of the tax rules. And those are a lot higher than your typical I didn't pay my full amount of taxes. So be very careful about this. You can also be subject to criminal investigation if the IRS deems that you had committed fraud to get out from underneath the audit criteria. So just be careful about this. You're ahead of your filing status. Double check that, your income limit with the IRS publication 501 for that year, and then feel free to apply any of these. So these are additional or additions to your standard deduction. So if you're blind, you get a little bit of a higher standard deduction. If you're age 65 or older, you also get a little bit. If you're married filing jointly and your spouse also does, is either blind or 65 or older, you get incrementally more and more of a standard deduction. You may also say, hey, look, I wasn't a U.S. citizen. I'm someone else's dependent. My work was performed in a different country. The IRS will take a closer look at those extenuating circumstances to determine whether or not those circumstances are sufficient for you to not have to file a tax return. So in this case, we put out John Doe's justification. If he had to go back to the 2022, then we would do this uniquely for the 2022 tax year. So a reason that you may need to that you may want to file a tax return, even if you don't owe any taxes, probably the biggest reason is you might have paid taxes, whether it's through your withholdings, whether you made an estimated tax payment, or you might have a tax credit that you should claim even if you don't owe a tax bill. So there are a lot of what are known as refundable tax credits, such as the earned income credit, the child tax credit, the additional child tax credit, and part of the American Opportunity Tax Credit, where not only does the credit bring your tax bill down to zero, it can actually generate a refund, even in a tax year where you did not have any tax liability. So you can either select that you want to apply the credit to another tax return. Let's just say, so you would have to file your 2023 tax return to get that credit, but you can say, I want this to be applied to my 2024 tax return. Here's my social security number. And then the IRS will put that in their record saying that any refund that you may have been owed will go onto the next year's tax record or tax return. Or you simply just want the IRS to cut you a check. So in either situation, you have to have filed your actual tax return to get the refund. So even if you don't have to file a tax return, you may consider going back to file just to claim a refund or credit that you were owed by the IRS. So that's the biggest reason. There are a couple of other reasons you may consider filing a tax return. We've included some references to the IRS website in our article. And then finally, you would sign this and date it. There should be an envelope that came with your CP59 notice. You would address it. You would put this, if you had a tax return to submit to support your statement, then you would attach your tax return, any schedules and statements, all of that stuff. You're certifying that it's true and correct and complete to the best of your knowledge. And you would send that to the address that's either on your envelope or on your CP59 notice. So, and then if you don't, your CP59 notice should contain a phone number that you would be able to call just to talk to an IRS person to make sure that your correspondence ends up in the right place. So, I mean, that's all we have for this form. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. And we'll attach any links in the show notes to either articles or videos that we've produced about the forms and the topics that we've covered here today. So if you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions or comments, or if there's another topic that you'd like to see covered in an upcoming video, please hit me up in the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.